That's pretty good. Hi, and
You,
welcome to a special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, September 29th, and we are today assessing the death of Senator Dianne Feinstein, California's senior senator, at the age of 90, after she'd been ailing for some time. And I have some very special guests who have spent a lot of time of their careers, of their very long and illustrious careers, covering Dianne Feinstein. Carla Marinucci, former political editor of the San Francisco Chronicle, former lead California reporter for Politico, and Phil Matier, the icon of San Francisco journalism, political journalism. Well, after I left town, and he writes for a number, or talks to a number of publications.
I didn't get a live link on this.
All right, I'll get it to you. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I apologize. We're trying to get Bill Carrick in here, who was Dianne Feinstein's chief strategist for many years. So we'll have him in a moment. But Carla, let's start with you. What's the one characteristic or feature that you would use to describe Dianne Feinstein, and what's a specific event or something you covered that really you think reflected that?
Oh, Jerry, I think we remember, all three of us remember the editorial board meetings at the San Francisco where Feinstein would come in, and if you didn't do your homework, if you weren't prepared to go toe to toe with her, she had you over a barrel. I mean, she'd come in with the staff, and she'd be able to sit there and go, give me page 86, paragraph 5, about that water policy, and knew the stuff off the top of her head. So she was a strong woman at a time in which we're seeing women in Congress particularly basically define their jobs by how many hits they can get on the internet and what kind of crazy behavior they can do in and out of the Capitol building. Feinstein had substance. She was serious. She was relentless, and I mean, she was focused on the job of representing the people of California, and she did not suffer fools lightly, particularly among reporters. And we all know the kind of questions that she'd come back at us with at those editorial board meetings. I just remember those, and many press conferences where if you didn't have your question down and you didn't have your facts together, she would call you on it. She knew her stuff backwards and forwards. And I think that worked to the people of California's favor in so many ways when you talk about the substantive issues that she was able to pass in Congress, whether it was the assault weapons ban, whether it was the CIA report on terrorism, and so much she did for the environment in California, not just the Desert Protection Act, which preserved millions of acres, but saving old growth redwoods, Tahoe, and the clarity issue. She had yearly meetings on that. She was on top of it, substantive in a way that maybe is considered old school today.
Yeah. All right. We're going to be joined in a moment by Dan Morain, former editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee. But Phil, Carla mentions those editorial board meetings, and I'm sure you remember, as I do, when our former colleague, the late Reggie Smith, got a draft report about one of the endless ballpark plans. Here's Dan Morain, that she had cooking, and we ran a page one story about it, and she was furious and called Reggie in the next morning and said, "I don't want any more of those premature ejaculations in the newspaper." And that went on for a couple of days, including in the editorial board. What's the one characteristic or quality that really jumps out when you think about her career and how you covered her?
She was tough. She was tough. At City Hall, her staff used to call her Iron Pants, because one, she was a pain there, and two, because she was tough. We have to remember she was elected to got the most votes to get on the city board of supervisors, and was made president of the board of supervisors, but was politely told by a number of people and in the media as well, really, you shouldn't take the job. It should go to a guy.
Right.
And she stood that. She was tough. When we had the two assassinations of Harvey Milk and George Moscone and the horror of Jonestown, she got the city through that. And then the White Night riots following the verdict on those killings. Again, she was tough. She was tough. Privately, she was crumbling. Publicly, she held her ground. And I would say one of the most undersung moments with her was, and it wasn't a moment, it was a fight, was for AIDS and closing the bathhouses in San Francisco. People tend to forget that at that time, people were saying that AIDS was a gay plague and you shouldn't even touch people that have it. People were afraid to. Nurses were supposedly afraid to deal with the patients. She got it weighed into that. She was the first, as far as I know, mayor or even public official, not only to acknowledge it, but to say, we are going to take care of this in a humane and compassionate way. And she also had to face big pushback from the gay political groups in San Francisco. People forget this, when she said close the bathhouses. And they pushed back saying, no, she's just trying to clean the town up for the Democratic convention. But she toughed that through again and again. So, yeah, I would say she was tough.
Yeah. Dan Morain, you covered Feinstein from a variety of perspectives. You were the San Francisco-based reporter for the LA Times, and you were the editorial page editor for the Sacramento Bee, and obviously for Politico when you were doing the news. Was that
Cal Matters?
Yeah, Cal Matters for the newsletter. But I remember a byline on a long report about the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco and her role in that. Is that the thing that you think, other than the assassinations, will stand as her biggest legacy as mayor?
It feels right. It was a huge deal when she moved to close the bathhouses. She also got weathered a recall attempt over her position on guns. This was a really consequential mayor at a pivotal time. I first met her in 1984 when the Democratic National Convention was coming to San Francisco, and the LA Times wanted me to do a curtain raiser, basically a profile of the city of San Francisco. So I got a few minutes with the mayor. I walked into her office at City Hall, and she said, I hope you're prepared. I'm very busy. There was no hello, how are you? How are the wife and kids? It's a lovely day outside. I hope you're prepared. I'm very busy. It sort of went on from there. She a few years later, it fell to me to do what we used to call the scrub of Dianne Feinstein when she was running for governor, and then also when she was running for U.S. Senate. And part of that was to look at her tax returns, which she and Dick Blum allowed me to look at. A reporter has to know his or her limitations, and one of mine is that I don't know taxes. So I hired a CPA in San Francisco to come with me. He was basically my leg person, and Dick Blum realized what was happening, and he was none too pleased and wasn't necessarily going to let me in. And he relented and he let me in. But then afterward, he called me at my office in San Francisco and just reamed me. A lot of F-bombs, a lot of, oh God, you dishonest liar. And I listened to him is my want. I'm sure Phil and Carla and you all did this too. You just kind of listened to him, let him rant. And then when he was done, I said, may I ask you a question? And sure, whatever. Sometime thereafter, I that day I talked to Cam Kawada, who was Feinstein's comms person, communications person, and I was laughing and I told him what happened. I wasn't going to write anything about it. And Cam sounded a little alarmed. About a half hour later, I got a call from Feinstein. I'm so sorry, Dan. I'm so sorry.
Wow.
And, you know, I thought it was gracious, you know, I mean,
Yeah,
it
she
was
was.
damage control, but it
She
was
had
gracious.
that. She had that convent of the Sacred Heart. I think we've driven material out of the room.
Yeah.
She had that convent of the Sacred Heart, cool, calm, collected thing, which I think served her very well and served the city very well after the assassinations. Let's talk about that moment a little bit, because I think
Okay.
that's
something right now. Let me get back to you.
that's what everybody's getting, like multiple requests at the same time. So let's talk about the assassinations a little bit. I mean, it's extraordinary. You know, Feinstein sort of burst into uh, uh, public attention when she was first elected in 1969, which was historic. But people forget she was defeated for mayor twice. The voters rejected her in 71 and 75, to the extent that she, on the morning of the assassinations, came into the press room and told Connie King and Ralph Crabe, and I think Sandy Zane was in there, you know, nah, I'm not going to run again. She was going to get out. You know, her husband had died, and, you know, she had gone through a lot. And then moments later, Dan White swept by, shot Harvey, and she went in, discovered the body, and came out and announced it all. Carla, where were you? What were you reporting on?
I don't remember. I was in San Francisco, but I mean, at that moment, we all tuned in. I wasn't there at City Hall. But that moment was just seared in everyone's memory. The way, the dignity, the strength that she summoned after just trying to staunch the blood of Moscone, after having Dan White walk past her as he just had come out.
Staunch the blood of milk. Harvey, it was Harvey.
Yes, right. I mean, she was there attending to them. I think that moment defined her in so many ways. Her ability to just put herself together and to deliver that news and to lead at a time when San Francisco needed a leader. She just stepped up to the plate, and I think that moment just defined her career forever. No other moment like that in politics.
Phil, people often forget that Jonestown had happened just 10 days before that. You know, Jim Jones had his People's Temple Church in San Francisco, and you know, was well connected politically until Marshall Kilduff and others started writing about what was going on behind closed doors there and everything. You know, there was a sense after the assassinations, after Jonestown, that, you know, the world had gone mad. It was really a crazy circumstance. And she stepped in, and I just think it's hard to overestimate the effect she had, not only then in the immediate aftermath, but going forward with the city when, you know, she kind of steered everything back to the center. What's your takeaway from all that time?
You know, it was Jonestown. It was the assassinations, and let's not forget, it was after the verdict came back on the Milk and Moscone assassinations. It was the White Night riots. At the same time, in that same sort of era, we had Patty Hearst, we had the SLA, we had the Black Liberation Army. We had a lot of things going on, and with San Francisco and the Bay Area at the center.
Somebody tried to bomb her house. Remember that?
Right. So you know, you're talking about this thing that's sort of unbelievable by today's standards, and they say, well, we've never seen a place more divided or anything like that. Well, back then the bombs and the bullets were actually going off. It just wasn't, you know, barbs across, you know, cable TV. This was real stuff. And you're right, she stepped in, and part of it was that there was, a desire for people to go back to the center, desire to try to get back into normal. And that's why subsequently they rejected Quentin Kopp, the more conservative, when he ran against her. She took Mosconi's people that didn't support her, didn't even like her, kept them in their jobs, and sort of blended it all together and kept the ship going. And that was pretty incredible. And then after that, then came the AIDS epidemic too. So she went from one storm after the other, and it was kind of, she did all of this, and then when she ran governor, remember, it all fell apart.
Yeah.
She
Well,
managed to get the Democratic nomination, but it was a tough fight. And then she lost to Wilson, and people had basically written her off again, saying, we are, even in San Francisco, Jerry, you remember it, Art Agnos is in his crew. Her day is done.
yeah.
Well,
it's true. There was that sense, but Dan, she really scrambled on that governor's race. She left office. I remember we did a poll, the Chronicle did a poll. She had 70% approval ratings from the city, which is amazing after 9 years. But then she was sort of out to run for governor. And then when George Deukmejian announced he wasn't going to run again, she jumped in. But her political consultant at the time, Clint Riley, was unhappy with her performance, ended up firing her, the first political candidate to be fired by her consultant. And maybe
or something like that, right?
History. But then Bill Carrick and his partner came in. They made an ad out of the assassination announcement, and John Vandekamp, the Attorney General, had this huge lead in the primary, and it was just erased almost overnight. And she raced to the nomination, but then she ran up against Wilson. And she also ran up, I think, still with some lingering sexism about a woman being in the chief executive job. What do you recall about that campaign?
Well, I wasn't one of the people on the bus, but I did. Like I say, it fell to me to do the scrubs of her. I think part of it is that there was, we were on the verge of going to war, or maybe we were in the war, the Gulf War, point that was. And it was a bad economic time, especially in California. And so I think you're absolutely right that part of it, a big part of it was people just didn't want to vote for a woman that year. California also had not turned blue. It was still, certainly in 1990, it was a swing state, right? It was a swing state through 92 when Clinton won. And then, kind of everything changed in 92, at least for a little while. 94 was a step back for Democrats, but in California. But yeah, so the politics were turning certainly in 1992 when Bill Clinton ran and won in California, and she won and Barbara Boxer won.
Yeah. Carla,
Clarence Thomas had a lot to do with that.
Exactly. Phil's correct that the Agnos and other kind of Democratic Party types in San Francisco wrote her off, but I think statewide, even losing that governor's race really, gave her a visibility and a celebrity that she sort of, won by losing. So after Pete Wilson appointed the great John Seymour, noted statesman and
real estate agent
and footnote to history, she just skunked him. But people also forget that there was that primary against Gray Davis. Gray Davis jumped in against her.
Right. And he really got out in front of his skis by going after her as Leona Helmsley.
He compared her to Leona Helmsley, the tax cheat hotel owner.
that almost did in his political career. I mean, yeah, remember, yeah, as you mentioned, some of the sexism that she faced in that race, the gubernatorial race. Her slogan was tough and caring. She talked to, the qualities of a woman, and she talked about bringing in gender balance into the administration. That kind of got her. Wilson used that against her, saying that there were going to be quotas. So yes, she became more well known, and more women certainly became aware of her personality and her poise and profile as a politician. So moving forward, going into that Senate race, I mean, Barbara Boxer talks about it, how, and this is sort of a quality she kept all through her life. She mentored other women. This was Jackie Spear talks about it. Other women, Nancy Pelosi talks about it, how Feinstein always put out a hand to other women seeking office, and she did it to Barbara Boxer. Remember that 1992 was the year of the woman. Both of them were elected, first time ever for California to elect two women. It was, or I think for any state, it was. Am I right on that? And yes, and Feinstein did not have to lend a hand to Barbara Boxer, but Boxer says they campaigned together as a team, and that made all the difference to a Marin County House member who was not well known, Barbara Boxer, at that time, and it helped put her over the top as well. So I think that was significant in terms of what we saw for Feinstein's whole career, was her ability to lend a hand, to reach out, to mentor other women seeking office, and many of them have their careers. They say owe their careers to her.
Yeah, Phil, I remember that that year, 1992, and Dan correctly points out the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings had a huge amount to do with the political atmosphere at that time. But that was the Thelma and Louise campaign.
That's right. Yes.
And Barbara running at the same time. Dianne had an easy race against Seymour. But Boxer had
Bruce Hershenson.
Bruce Hershenson, right. And it wasn't until our old friend Bob Mulholland showed that Bruce had been he was going to
the Seven Veils Club.
That it was finished. But the other thing, I mean, it's so amazing, her story. It was just in 90 that Boxer called John Vandekamp, who was Feinstein's opponent in the Democratic primary for governor, the best feminist in the race, because she wasn't a movement feminist. She wasn't out there in demonstrations and things. She did it by, her life was kind of a feminist.
Well, Jerry, you wrote about this in Never Let 'Em See You Cry. That she really gets her start in the 1960s when she's walking with young Willie Brown and protesting discrimination against African Americans in the city of San Francisco, right? I mean, that's kind of
but I'm just talking about more feminist things per se, that I think movement feminist said she never really
she was not a burn your bra Gloria Steinem,
right. And then as mayor, you remember she vetoed the domestic partners legislation.
That wasn't necessarily feminism, Jerry. I mean, she was like down.
Working women didn't like it, the SEIU and those types.
Yeah, but that was classic Dianne. SEIU, the Democratic Party. She was a party unto herself, and it infuriated so many people. And when she made a move, they were always there at her back with knives. Okay,
right.
I can't.
Well, they booed her.
Pardon?
Well, they booed her at the Democratic convention when
the death penalty.
Over the death penalty.
Politicians were viciously on her. They said she's not a real feminist. This was a time when Nancy Pelosi, when she first ran for Congress in San Francisco, she's a cocktail matron. She's a Pacific Heights Chamber of Commerce
party girl.
Party girl, and the progressives were saying that was the progressive saying, that wasn't some right wing
Harry Britt's campaign.
Exactly. So Dianne has always been her own party, and she pissed people off constantly. some people, if they were against her, they just went after her. Other people quietly mumbled and went away. But I remember one of the big jumps that she made was actually running for the Senate. Because after the governor's race, remember, she styled herself as the executive, as the chief executive. She was hell on her staff. She was hell on everybody because she was, I was going to say the man, but no, she was the boss. You know, this is pre-non-gender. She was just the boss. And for her to say, okay, I'm going to be one of 100 was a pretty, you know, she had to go through it like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to be that? And what does she do? She goes to Washington and she does the same thing there. She goes, right? This is all, starts launching into different things, putting people there, this, you know, and for 30 years, that's what she was. There was Democrats and Republicans, and then there was Feinstein, and it infuriated everybody, especially here in California, because you couldn't run against her.
No, because those politics really played in California. I mean, she really understood the zeitgeist of the California voter as it moved more blue, Dan, as you note. She was really in tune with the majority of California voters.
Well, you know, you think about her issues in the Senate. I mean, certainly the assault weapons ban was a high point, but it wasn't the only high point. You know, I think she will be most remembered in the Senate in her days in the Senate for the assault weapons ban of 1994. May it rest in peace. But you know, she was instrumental in water. I mean, what politician today pays any attention to California water?
Right.
Now that she's gone, I don't know of one. And yet we're going to be in a world of hurt water-wise in the coming years. And you know, I think her high point in the Senate was when she released the torture report.
Yeah.
You know, the inside
The CIA
report on how the CIA tortured people after 9/11. Against the wishes of President Obama, right?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, nobody wanted her to release this report,
Right.
and she was determined to do that. It's a big deal.
It is. And you know, it's interesting because I'm doing all these interviews today about, and people are saying, you know, okay, her last year, is it going to just cast a doubt on her entire legacy? And I'm looking at it and I'm going, hey, Dianne already got the movie. It's called The Report. Annette Bening starred as Dianne Feinstein. Do you get that? Okay. That is what it's about. That is the history. It's like, you can talk this, you can talk that, but she got Annette Bening and she got The Report. And didn't they get an Oscar or something for it?
And who played you, Phil? Ned Beatty or somebody like that.
But you know what I mean? Dan's absolutely right. I mean, this is, as they would say in Hollywood, this has all the emotional touchstones on it, right? And she did it. And that was what she did.
Yeah. You know, she's not the only U.S. senator from California to die in office. I mean, I'm sure there's more than one, but one is Hiram Johnson. And he was out of it for the last 18 months of his time in office. I don't think too many people remember that.
Well, that's because he didn't tweet too much.
No, he didn't tweet much at all.
Yeah,
no,
but you did cover him, I think.
Yeah, I remember.
I'd like to get you guys' take on this. Is how much of this last, you know, her exiting stuff? We talk about the end of the era. Is this the end of bipartisanship? I mean, because that was one of the cornerstones of Dianne from mayor on up. You know, was that she was always ready to cut a deal with anybody to get what needed to be done, and people at the end wanted her out because she wasn't divisive enough.
And that was the criticism we faced for the last couple of years. When we went to Democratic conventions and they would boo, as you said, Dan, they would boo her. Kevin De Leon challenged her, of course, and the Democratic Party rejected an endorsement of Feinstein. She was too civil in a lot of ways for her own party. Remember, the criticism she took during the Kavanaugh hearings, during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, where she actually talked about sort of reaching across the aisle, listening to the other side. a lot of Democrats, progressive Democrats, didn't want to hear that. And she did take a lot of heat in her last years. But as Phil said, spine of steel, that was the characteristic that did her well all through her career. And she stood for what she stood for and didn't waver, even in the face of some real heat from her own party base.
Yeah.
And you got to give her that.
Carla's so right. You know, I mean, people who say that she's going to be defined by the last 6 or 12 months don't know Dianne Feinstein.
She had a 60-year career. I mean, she had 30 years in local, mostly local, little bit of state politics, even before she started her 30-year Senate career. I mean, it's just to take a step back, just her longevity, her persistence, her resilience through all that is just extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think that, and because of that, she's in the pantheon, I think, of when you talk about California elected officials who have lasted, whose legacy it goes over decades. Jerry Brown, Pelosi, in our lifetimes, but I mean, there's so few of them who have that kind of a huge and substantive legacy that expands over decades. So I agree with Dan and Phil and you, Jerry, that the last couple of months, the kind of criticism out there, that there's no way that can overshadow what has come before with Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, I'm curious, when you were the Ed Page editor at the Sacramento Bee, I'm sure she would come in on a fairly regular basis to talk about things. And as Carla pointed out, she'd come in with a 864-page report she wanted to talk about. But talk a little bit about, her ability to sort of master the minutia of very complex issues. You mentioned water, but there were others.
So in 2016 she would call. So I would get her on the phone if I needed her. But in 2016, she came to the Ed board in Sacramento, and she was there to talk about water, and it's a riveting topic. Water, we love it. She had this big binder. She had charts. She had a couple aides with her, but for an hour she answered all our questions about water, and she told us in fine detail about what her vision was for this water deal she was working on with none other than Kevin McCarthy. And at one point she turned to an aide to ask some, it seemed to me, really minor question. That was the only time she turned to an aide. The rest of the time, she's an 82-year-old woman, and she knew this issue like literally the back of her hand. I mean, this was an extraordinary performance, and she was charming, and she told stories, and after she was done talking about water, she was as she would say, very prepared.
Yeah. Speaking of the back of her hand, you remember when she wrote the 3 words on her hand during the debate with Pete Wilson that she was supposed to emphasize? That was a big scandal at the time. But Phil, the other thing is, as Carla points out, she would bite your head off, and she was never a big fan of the press. But she also, sort of privately or behind the scenes, had this very personal, warm touch. I just remember when Susan Yoakum, our former colleague, was dying of breast cancer over a long period of time, she would check in with Susan all the time. And, how are you doing? Is there something I can do? Oh, I know Dr. Such and so at UCSF. Have you seen him? And so on. And when I was dying at UCSF, she came to the hospital. She was a chairman of the intelligence committee. She left all of her, she had security detail and stuff, but she just came in to say, oh, hi, I brought you a book. And, so there was this other side to her that was, behind the sort of steely presentation that she always, straight-laced presentation she always liked to make. And I'm sure you saw a glimpse of it from time to time.
Yeah, it did. And it's interesting, you always wonder about people in history and how how we rate them. Now, so I'm gonna ask you, so was it Dianne Feinstein, or was it the times that Dianne Feinstein went through? I mean, think about that. She went through all this tumultuous times to define our era. Well, the comedic, the tragic, everything. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump,
Warren
riots in
Hinkle.
the streets, Warren Hinkle, riots in the streets, gays, gender, all of this stuff. And she somehow marched through it, whereas other politicians, flop, flop, flop. I mean, even Jerry Brown. Did I say, where's Jerry? He would just take, he'd escape. But Dianne has been there constantly through it. I can't think of anybody else that has.
Yeah,
And
navigating the center in a kind of,
yes, but and surviving.
yeah.
That's what-
Carla,
so-
I don't want to get too shrinky on us, but as you know, she had a very difficult childhood. Her
Right.
mother was mentally ill, had addiction problems, and was emotionally and physically abusive to Dianne and her two sisters. Dianne was the oldest and took care of them. And it's, I mean, I've written this. It seems to me that having to play that role, having to impose some control on this chaos that's going along in your house, and but keep a good face on it. They were wealthy, they were privileged. No one could know what was going on. I mean, that sort of, I think those, whatever it was she learned from doing that, transferred to her political life to a large extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was just a certain elegance about the way she dealt with adversity, the way she dealt with criticism from even within her own party. She was able to focus on the job and never got personal, the kind of personal politics we're seeing today with Trump and Matt Gaetz and a lot of the on the Republican side. That just wasn't, she was old school in that way. And that's why I mean, I kind of wonder, is she one of the last of kind of that breed of politicians in an era, as I started out saying, where so much of success is unfortunately measured by how many hits you're getting on Instagram.
It's
and
performative.
performative, right? And Twitter, and there's no sort of a need to actually produce results from a lot of these folks in Congress now. She was of a different breed. The results mattered to her, which is why we saw her reach across the aisle so many times. And as Dan said, go deep on issues that mattered to Californians, like water, that may not have been sexy and Instagram, happy, but at the same time, that is where she put her work and her heart. And she produced in a way that Californians are going to feel the impact for generations to come. When you talk about the Desert Protection Act and, saving the old growth redwoods and Tahoe and so many other things, these things are part of that legacy. And I think we all.
I only got a minute. I got to go back to work. So I want to ask you guys.
Well, if you only got a minute, tell me something, because you always are very aware of what Willie Brown is thinking, and as Dan points out, they were sort of early allies. Have you talked to Willie today? We
did a broadcast this morning, but I want to ask you guys. We've got the legacy. We got 30 seconds. What now? What do you see? What now?
Yeah, Gavin's kind of.
Now, are we going to have another session on Gavin and maybe bring a couch out for him?
He's painted himself in a corner by going out on cable news and saying he'd appoint a black woman. Barbara Lee called his bluff on that, and he wants to appoint a caretaker. I mean, gee whiz, think about it. Whoever he appoints has to be on the ballot in March on the primary, and then there's a runoff in November for what? 2-month election. Who's going to take that? I mean, it is an insult if you try to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you said. He's painted himself into the corner. If he sticks by his promise to appoint a black woman, I think, he's got a limited group of people who are not ambitious when you talk about, say, a Holly Mitchell, that's somebody who has a great future.
Holly
There's no way that
Nobody's caretaker.
yeah, there's nobody's
So let me
caretaker,
ask
right.
this, Jerry, you're the master. I couldn't believe that Gavin actually said that. You know, that he's going to appoint a caretaker. That's a wink and a nod thing. You do not say that. You don't say that going in. You're Dan, you're a placeholder. You know what? Thank you.
I
Gee.
will not serve.
I'm
Right.
sorry, Dan, I couldn't get George Skelton on this show. So
Yeah, but you only come on for 30 seconds. I mean, I'm sitting there going, what? Well, you know what? So I'm going to leave this to you. But I mean, what a
Maxine, what about Maxine?
She said no.
Yeah,
I think I understand. She said no. You maybe got a Shirley Weber, but you got to get someone that's going
How
to go to
about Oprah?
DC.
You think
And
Oprah?
also, I mean, yeah, there's Oprah in Malibu. My question is to the group: is there such a thing? Can you? There's no stipulation in the Constitution an appointment is an interim, right? And I've never known an interim to step down at the end. Whether it's-
However, excuse me, but the Democrats need that vote. I mean, they don't.
But to get judges through.
I realize that, but you can't say to somebody going in, Carla, you of course are not going to run. That would be a heck of a job interview. You're supposed to wink and nod that, right?
Yeah, but that's exactly what he may have to do to fill that seat. As Dan points out, you know, there's judicial appointments now. Things are too tight in this. They can't just leave that seat.
Right.
Well, and they're also going to lose the Menendez seat. You know, I can't imagine he survives through.
New Jersey senator who has all of the gold bars in his
Oh,
pocket.
come on, Danny's from New Jersey.
Another Democrat.
Jersey, they get twice as many votes.
One thing we should say, you know, she is a throwback in many ways, Feinstein. Nobody would ever think that she had her hand out.
No.
Right. There will be no gold bars. There will be no cash.
Well,
right?
no,
I mean, not who Feinstein is.
No, but she was certainly, she grew up in wealth and privilege, and she was always maintained in those lifestyles. And
sure.
You just look at this litigation that's going on over Dick Plum's.
They're calling me. I got to go, folks.
All right, Phil, thanks for
joining
joining us.
And all that. Historic day.
All right, stay well, man. Thank you.
See ya.
Take care. he's always hustling. He's always hustling.
I do think, Gary, I think that question about the Senate, whether Gavin will stick to his promise of appointing a Black woman, and I think he kind of has to.
Got very little choice.
He doesn't have choice. He has painted himself into a corner. just about the time that he's going to debate DeSantis, by the way. So
yeah, and because he has to act quickly. I mean, it's he appoints, and then the person serves.
Yeah.
The person serves until the next election, which is in March. So, you know, if they're going to get some judges done, they better get it done fast.
They need a vote to end the you know, the looming shutdown. I mean, there are a bunch of things that they need that 51st vote for.
Yeah. She cast a vote yesterday, her last vote.
Yeah. I'm thinking Dr. Shirley Weber may be where he goes on it, but Dan, any other thoughts on it?
Well, you know, I thought Shirley Weber too. She's she's brilliant. She's got a really nice job though, as Secretary of State, and it's a consequential job. And you know, as Alex Padilla could attest, it's a job that matters. So you know, I'm not sure that would be the way she would want to go. And she's not a caretaker. I mean, she's run for office. She might well run again. I don't know, for U.S. Senate. You know, I mean, I thought, you know, there could be ways out of it. You know, Senator Nancy Pelosi, but I can't imagine she's running for re-election.
Pelosi's running again. I mean, you know, that's the other.
Barbara Boxer.
Barbara Boxer, yeah.
Not Black. Okay.
Not Black, but you know, she is a woman. Yeah. Well, and you know, the other issue this raises, and you know, it's political, but also cultural, is the Democrat gerontocracy. Now, this is the second time this has happened. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who stayed in office past her 90s and was just turned into a disastrous series of events for
Right.
Democrats, Pelosi.
And there are some Democrats that are mad at Feinstein or have been mad at Feinstein for the last year, saying why doesn't she resign? I think that's going to kind of go into the shadows at this point, but you're absolutely right. The gerontocracy, when we talk about the age, Zoe Lofgren, Anna Eshoo, a lot of the good friends, they're in their 70s. And Pelosi, as you mentioned, there's a lot of frustration among a younger generation trying to get their foot in the door of Congress, and that doesn't look like it's going to change in any time soon.
Hey, we got about 5 minutes left, and I do want to note that the state Republican convention is going on this week or this weekend, and all of the so-called candidates are showing up, but Trump is also showing up, which is kind of a big deal. Feinstein, it seems to me, was a little bit slow in realizing what Trump was and the threat that he really poses to democracy. You remember she had that town meeting or whatever it was in San Francisco that said, "Oh, we all have to support the president." This is in 2017 or something, and give him a chance to see.
Yeah, that did go over well with the local
Was it
audience.
just because, a failure of imagination on her part that she couldn't imagine anybody in politics who would be so cynical and self-interested and narrowly focused on his own interest?
Well,
Yeah.
I have to wonder whether she believed that or I mean, one reason to be bipartisan is at some point she would need his signature on something she was working on, right? So why alienate the guy? It wasn't going to cost her an election to say something nice about him.
Yeah,
But it did cost her the goodwill among a lot of Democrats.
It did. She took tremendous anger from audiences locally. I saw that myself, but I think it's what you said, Jerry. I think in her experience and her universe, a politician like Trump was just like unreal. I think she could not imagine someone taking office who was so self-centered and unable to reach across the aisle. And she still felt that was part of the job. And I think the reality just didn't bite until, when we saw the last, Supreme Court hearings where she was, trying to make nice when Democrats did not want her to make nice, and she just didn't get it. I think that was because of her experience and
who she was. I mean,
that's right.
Who she was. All right, I'm going to ask each of you for just a final thought about her, but I'm going to go first because, what I remember as mayor, I think Mark Barabak in his column this morning used the word potentate, the way that she sort of oversaw the city to every small detail. She used to carry a turnout coat in the trunk of her car, so if she came upon a fire, she'd jump out and bother the battalion chief and the guy who was stricken on the street in the Tenderloin the day, and she jumped out and gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And the police department was just, she was all over stuff. And I remember she had those famous Monday morning meetings, staff meetings in her office where everybody had to come in and give her a report. And Chief Cornelius Murphy, the last sort of throwback to when the Irish ran the police department in San Francisco, was her idea of a police chief. And it was tall and good looking. And he famously told her, she said, Chief, I'm hearing a lot of reports about break-ins in the Sunset District. What do you think we should do about it? And Murphy says, why don't you turn off the police radio? So that was that was kind of the way that she was. Carla, what do you remember? What's your last thought?
Is that, I think there isn't a woman in elective office today, or a woman who is interested in politics or is affected by politics in California that has not been impacted by Senator Feinstein. She was in every sense not only an icon, but a trailblazer. When they talk about breaking glass ceilings, she did it numerous times for women. She opened so many doors for women and fought for the issues that mattered to so many women voters: reproductive rights, the environment, and just doing the right thing, as Dan pointed out, on the issue of torture and the CIA. It took tremendous spunk and spine on her part. So I think the way she advanced the role and the profile of women in politics in California and beyond is just incalculable, and it's something we all have to thank her for today.
Well said. Dan, last word.
Gutsy woman who left very deep footprints. Politicians could learn a thing or two by studying Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, when we talk about legacies and substantive accomplishments, I think you're exactly right. All right, Carla Marinucci, Dan Morain, Phil Mateer, thank you so much. It's a hard day, a sad day. It was not unexpected, but I still was somewhat shocked by it. I don't know. I just figured she'd.
I think it says everything. She voted yesterday. I mean, she voted.
Yeah.
It's always been said that she was going to go out in the Senate, and
Yep.
she did. She did.
And we're going to drag her out. That's exactly right. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll
Thank
talk.
you, Jerry. See you, Carla.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks.